Hello, everyone. Testing the audio a little bit. We're going to go ahead and get started at 10:30. So if you need to grab that last cup of water, coffee, that midday coffee, or some lunch, we're going to go ahead and get started at 10:30 to allow for more attendees to get onto the call. I have some hellos from Brownsville. Shout out Region 1. I see lots of familiar names. Oh, hello from Corpus, Benavides ISD, Socorro ISD. I see a lot of really familiar names on the call. So Ira Ann Sheffield, Region 1 specialist, a lot of familiar names. Very excited to be able to talk with you all about some more Ptac support. Ferris, YISD, Roy City, Brooks County, lots of really great good morning vibes from the chat. We're going to get started in about another minute to let people get onto the call. Ysleta from all over Texas. We're just very excited to be here this morning to talk about Ptac. It's a Ptac day. If you were with me on 9A and you might be with me on 9C, we're gonna have a really packed day today full of lots of Ptac, but we're excited to be giving some more funding to some great campuses in the network. Okay, so it is 10:30 on the dot. I'm gonna go ahead and get started. Just want to emphasize, because again, we do have quite a bit of Ptac webinars and a lot of TCLAS webinars today. Just as a reminder, this particular webinar is for decision point 9B for Ptac success for the TCLAS initiative. And this is the kickoff or onboarding webinar. So we're happy to have y'all, excited to welcome and congratulate you all. You're already in our CCRSM network, but we're very excited to be able to provide funding support for some of our campuses that are already doing great Ptac work. So my name is Crystal Garza. I'm the coordinator of College and Career Readiness School Models here at the Division of College, Career, and Military Preparation. Very familiar with lots of people on the call. But I just want to emphasize with the division and where I'm from within TEA, I do work a lot with the career technical education teams, as well as advanced academics and the counseling, advising student support staff. So if you already have contacts with them and haven't necessarily familiarized with yourself with me or any of the rest of our team, just know that you can reach out to them. They'll probably send some stuff my way if you have any questions. And I wanted to make sure to highlight that we do have our CCRSM box. Since many of you are already in the network, you know we have Mobilize and you have direct access with your coaching staff, but we do have that mailbox that goes straight to our TEA mailbox for these models. For anything early college, T-STEM, or Ptac. So some agendas and FYI for today's webinar. Again, welcome and some introductions of thank you for putting in your names into the chat. Really appreciate that everybody's motivated and excited to get some Ptac funding to keep supporting the Ptacs that we have. The second piece we want to make sure of is the TCLAS award and next steps. The great thing about 9B is that the next steps are definitely going to be minimal, and we already have that connection with you all. So I'm hoping that it'll be a very smooth transition for you all as you get TCLAS. Then we'll be going into some decision-specific deep diving components. For anyone that's on the call that's very immersed in the Ptac, it is going to be a little bit of a an iteration of some of the Ptac components. So if you're newer to Ptac, it'll be really great. If you're a little bit more seasoned with Ptac, it will be a little bit more of a review. And then we're going to recap some of those next steps to make sure that you and your team are on board with what is needed for moving forward with the Ptac success. Some FYIs, if you are going to ask a question, please put them into the question and answer box in Zoom. It makes it a little bit easier for us to pull those questions at the end and try to follow up. I have no problem putting in the chat, but it can get to be a lot of comments and I can't keep track of if I've answered them. So please put them in the Q&A. And another FYI is to make sure that the recording and the slides will be posted on the TCLAS website. So where you were able to find the link to the guidance documents and pieces like that, the recording for this particular webinar will be posted as well as the slides. The slides are not currently posted on the website. They will be posted afterwards. So some next steps at this point, you or the representative that submitted your TCLAS application will have submitted the award confirmation survey, which is a representation to us that you have committed to the program assurances. We're going to go over those in this webinar, but that you have said yes by that due date of September 10th. So that's passed. But I know that if you did have issues with that, the TCLAS leadership is very amenable to working with you all with this. We are currently at step 2, which is the onboarding webinar, the kickoff webinars that you're currently in for 9B Ptac success. So please check those award summaries to make sure that you are in the right place for 9B. They want us to make sure to let you all know that you have completed that additional onboarding that's outlined in a PDF attachment that was sent out to you all. If you are unfamiliar with this, you might again want to check with that TCLAS representative that received that information to make sure that you all are doing that and have actively done that through September 21st. And that third step is that e-grant application. So making sure that you complete that e-grant application to receive your notice of grant award. So I know it seems like you're submitting a lot of information over to TCLAS, but it is critical that you do square away that e-grant component because that is how you will receive that NOGA award. So make sure to get with that business management component or whomever is assigned at your district that they have completed that e-grant application. I believe it should be opening soon. And I'll be telling you about some webinar and office hour opportunities in the next couple of slides. So for the onboarding, webinar schedule, you are currently here with us on September 16th. Like I mentioned, it's a Ptac day and we're currently in that decision 9B webinar point. And we will have 9C later today at 1. And just a shout out to the CRIMSI and the SAVL for 2A and 2C. Those webinars will be happening later today. So lots of webinars today for anybody that received those particular decision points. If you haven't already registered for those links, please make sure to go to that TCLAS website. And please, I think we should have those recordings and slides from these webinars up within a day or so. So definitely check back to see where we are with those recordings. I want to make sure to highlight the e-grants components of this. So if you're looking at this at a later time, we do have tomorrow an e-grants webinar, specifically tomorrow at 9 from 9 to 10, but we will also be holding e-grants office hours through October 29th. So if you're not as familiar, I know for myself and some of the people on the call, we've been working specifically more with competitive paper-based grants. So make sure to check that out if you do have any questions on the e-grant side, to make sure that you know how to access your award and how to make sure that your district is in the system for this TCLAS. So a great little slide for the quick bit.ly registration links. Again, emphasizing if you're not familiar with eGrants, you definitely want to make sure to check out the webinar, go to the office hours, even if you don't have questions, and try to listen to other people's questions. That was a tactic during the office hours before the TCLAS awards were awarded, and I appreciated it because we got a lot of contact with people. So these are optional webinars, but definitely check them out if you're not as familiar with eGrants, and you might have to start supporting that through the funding that you received. So we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. I'm going to try and apply these slides as best I can. So already being in the network, we all know that Pathways in Technology Early College High School, we hear Ptac all the time, but we just want to emphasize that transitional experience, because I do know that we did award some currently planning campuses, and it's always good for them to kind of hear the intentionality of Ptac again, but also for anybody who's new to Ptac and is inheriting a campus that is already a little bit more seasoned with Ptac, it's good to have this in their back pocket. So it still stands that Ptacs still are intentionally recruiting that at-risk population, making sure that the campuses are recruiting to be a reflection of what the district is representing in their region locally, making sure that it's open enrollment and no cost to students. Because Ptac is, we have campuses that are already graduating students, but a lot of them are in that midpoint. Many of you are starting to serve your campus students with dual credit. So that reminder of making sure that your MOU has consideration to that cost share for dual credit. You're making sure that the opportunities to earn those post-secondary credentials or degrees, certifications, or certificates are there. Again, we know that maturation level is you're either in the first iteration of providing dual credit or credentials or certifications, and you're leaning into making it into a smoother rhythm. And so part of the Ptac success is to either expand on that and maybe possibly build a new credentialing system that you didn't have before, or expand it to more students so that more students have the opportunity to provide these pieces. That MOU with IHE and MOU with business and industry, if you're already serving students, you likely already have those MOU pieces in place. But in regards to Ptac success, as you, again, are expanding the opportunities you're providing, how are you working into your MOUs and expanding and including more MOUs with business and industry for different programs that you're going to offer? How are you managing all that? So thinking about this a little bit more globally, because it's almost like you're starting a new Ptac from scratch, because you're probably instituting a new program. So having these things, considering them at the back of your mind as you're moving forward with the Ptac success funding. That alignment to regional workforce needs, again, if you started with us as planning, more than likely, or began in 1819 for a lot of them with students, make sure that that alignment is still there. And if you're expanding your program, what does that regional workforce alignment look like now to be able to offer that program to your students? quickly through the Ptac success. Work-based learning at every grade level. So again, kind of that dual credit component, you're starting to offer more practicums, more capstones. How are you going to use the funding to support some of those WBL components? And of course, again, talking about that maturation level, legislatively, campuses for Ptac can offer a 5th year or a 6th year, which a lot of the campuses on the call are very experienced with. They've already had those discussions, but as you add on more programs of study, possibly through this Ptac Success Grant, is a 5th or 6th year needed for whatever you're trying to introduce for your next students. As we're more than likely all familiar with connecting that high school to college and career and that triangle of support, it's important to really emphasize that with expanding or providing more opportunities to more students, your partners need to be able to understand what your capacity critical points will be and where the difficult components will be. So if you're offering a brand new kind of program of study, is your college partner ready to support you in that? Do you have another industry partner that you're going to partner with right away for this new program of study? Or if you're going to open up your program of study to more students, is your college partner ready to handle that? Is there a phase-in process? How are you all working through those pieces? And at the core, making sure that these programs are still remaining open enrollment to whatever lottery system that might be required, or you're able to take all the students, and making sure that the program remains no cost to students. So at the core, making sure that you're maintaining those Ptac tenants while you're expanding either your student population or the programs of study that you're offering. I know with the Ptac program, we definitely hammered down the program fundamentals as being very partnership driven. So I'm just gonna keep emphasizing that, because on the call, we have people that are in the middle of planning to people that are already graduating students. And so I want to emphasize that because Ptac Success is meant to support those through an expansion of the work that you're already doing, or adding on a pathway, please make sure that you're keeping in mind how you need to scale, not just for the students, but how you need to prepare your partners to modify certain pieces. We know that MOUs are pretty much solidified for 21-22, which is this academic year. So how are you going to accommodate that in the interim, which leads into how are you going to eventually spend your money? So we definitely want to emphasize that whatever changes you want to propose with this Ptac Success and the funding and how you want to support it, that your partners are aware that these are the plans you want to move forward with. The great thing is that the majority of the people on the call have really great partnerships with their higher ed partners or their workforce partners. So these conversations are already happening, have happened. But now that you have accepted the awards, we want to make sure that your partners definitely know that you've accepted this funding and that you will be moving forward with some changes to your program. So I'm going to use this slide to emphasize the Ptac campuses will continue to receive the technical assistance that's currently being provided through Educate Texas. So there's not going to be necessarily any additional technical assistance because you're already in our system of being familiar with Ptac campuses and the dynamics that are involved there. If you do feel like you need additional coaching or consulting, please don't hesitate to reach out to TEA and or Educate Texas so that they can accommodate you through this process. I know a lot of the campuses, some of them on the call might be Ptac planning in the middle of it. So please let us know if you're having any issues or feel like you definitely need more support as you move this funding forward. So just a refresher, some of the components that services that you will be receiving and currently are, is that coaching and consulting. I believe that Educate Texas is still ongoing in the process to assign coaches if they haven't already done so. I believe if you haven't received it, it should be on its way very soon. I believe we are having a kickoff for the semester virtually, and they have really great plans in the future for site visits and further professional development. For anybody who's still a little bit newer, please expect some outreach from Educate Texas for potential site visits, and for some of those feedback and support pieces like self-evaluations. I do want to remind some of the campuses about the additional funding through House Bill 3 that you may not already be utilizing. If you are a current planning campus, the first check mark will apply once you start serving students through Ptac. That's $50 per student based off of our PEMS indicator. That's when you start serving students. The weighted funding for CTE and Tech App courses, so you should be making sure to make the most of that and aligning to the CTE programs of study. The industry-based certification reimbursement when you start serving students, and the college prep examination reimbursement on top of the TCLAS funding. So just a refresher for those that are wondering about additional funding on top of TCLAS. So making sure that the Ptac is front and center and that we acknowledge that it's our guiding document. Again, if you're a little bit newer to the Ptac and inheriting a more established Ptac program, make sure to familiarize yourself with the Ptac blueprint and the outcomes-based measures. If you're currently a planning campus, make sure that you're working with your coaches and asking really intentional questions about the outcomes-based measures or the OBMs. I believe in our kickoff webinar, we will be talking about the coaching protocol instituted by my colleague, Christine Bailey, for coaching. So that'll be talked about a lot more in our kickoff. Something that isn't mentioned yet, but we are ramping up to it, is our Ptac blueprint revision process. So we did undergo lots of focus group feedback in the spring semester and a little bit in the summer. And because I know that on the call, we have a lot of people already from our network, I do want to make sure to give a slight update that we are working on the Ptac blueprint revisions currently. We will be sending them to our leadership soon, and hopefully getting a public comment period out to you all, possibly during the midwinter season, and opening it up for as long as we can keep it open, to make sure that anybody that didn't participate in the focus groups gets a chance to do so. But we still encourage people to be familiar with the Ptac blueprint because it does outline the design elements and the benchmarks that still remain critical to building the Ptac campuses. So again, I know it's a lot of a refresher, but just thinking about this through the lens of building out the Ptac campuses that you already have, please make sure to revisit with your team what components of the benchmarks that we already have that need to be revisited to accommodate for more students or new programs of study. So we're looking at it from definitely a target population perspective, because how are you going to recruit new students and when do you want to do that, versus that curriculum and instruction component, where if you're going to provide a new course of study, what are the steps that we need to retake in order to launch a new expanded program of study through the Ptac Academy that you already have. So these benchmarks are going to be critical to looking at it again from your team to make sure that you're building more Ptac services with the funding that you've been provided. So again, I know we have some planning campuses, but they're moving toward that implementation. So I'm going to focus a little bit on that implementation for recommended activities. Pretty much all of the boxes are checked, but I think a big piece to consider after we spoke to quite a bit of Ptacs on what it is exactly that gets spent the most money. One big one was transportation. So that's one piece that you can already start thinking about using almost immediately. We know that there's not a lot of travel because of different COVID restrictions across the state, but that has historically been an issue for campuses to supplement. So that's definitely something there. Certifications and licensing fees, we do know that that's something that that is very costly, even though we do have the IBC reimbursements. Just keep that in mind for your students, especially those that have multiple IBCs that might get offered through their program of study. And a big one is textbooks. We know that it can vary from different areas of the state for that particular cost. So definitely allowable. And consumables and specialized equipment. We know a lot of you all might already have the specialized equipment, but there are maintenance components to it and supplies and materials that run the gamut from health science, welding, automotive to courses like information technology where you might have to buy software. So these are all very often used activities that need maintenance year after year. So these are definitely allowable pieces that you can consider for spending that money over that 3-year period. Wanted to make sure to put a link to the Ptac web resources, just so that we can make sure that everybody's familiar with where to get the information from. One thing that's not on here, but that is incredibly helpful for anybody who's received a competitive grant from TEA is the budget and guidance document on their website. Before this gets put as a PDF, I'll make sure to link that on here because I do know we have some really smart questions about the funding sources that we'll get to very shortly. So for decision 9B for Ptac success, wanted to make sure to go over some of the requirements. These slides might look very familiar from our first webinar for TCLAS. The requirement is that there is an existing Ptac campus programming or planning. One of the questions was about supporting the number of campuses that you were approved for. We wanted to give you as much flexibility as sending a certain maximum, but looking collectively at how much money we had to support all the Ptac initiatives, which was 9A, 9B, and 9C. We did have to limit the number of Ptac campuses per district. So if that was different. So all that to say, you do have some time to have a conversation with your district and figure out which campus you will be moving forward with to support further Ptac expansion with Ptac success. We'll be reaching out to you to confirm the campus at a later time, but it's not critical for us to know it right now. We're more concerned about making sure that you set up your e-grants first, so we can make sure to get the notice of grant awards out to you. For anybody, for most of us on the call that are familiar with the competitive grant process, because we award by district, by LEA, that's the priority right now. So your award letter will have told you if how many campuses you were supported with, which we had to set a minimum. The requirements are for that ongoing support for an IHE and business and industry partners. Super important, because if you're expanding or offering more support, you don't want to get your partners caught off guard. And expanding the existing Ptac opportunities. So what we've been talking about this whole time, what are those plans to enhance your Ptac program that you currently are planning for. So the timeline, you have the whole 3 years. It's from fall 2021 to 2024. So it's almost like right now is a hybrid of planning and implementing. We have some campuses that are ready to go and start serving their students in the options that they'd like to expand on. But we also have some campuses that need a little bit more time planning. So we're allowing for some flexibility of, do you need some time to plan? You can kind of decipher on at your own pace with your district how soon you need to implement these changes. And increasing that student enrollment, it takes time. It takes time to include more students into a Ptac. But if you already have those expansion efforts going now or starting in the spring, that's up to your district to decide. And the award calculation is $200,000 per approved Ptac campus for the life of that particular grant, which is the 3 years. So, excuse me, for Ptac success, I just want to emphasize some of the purposes and the assurances in this particular grant. So the intention is to expand those practices of the Ptac blueprint. Make sure that you're continuing to keep your leadership and advisory council in the loop about some of the work that you're planning to expand on, increase those opportunities, the pathways and number of students served in a program. A great way to think about it is, if you already have a Ptac that has a specialty in welding and you want to include a different CTE program of study and expand the number of students, and you want to include, let's say, a computer information technology cohort, you can do so. That's one of the main points of this success is you're increasing the number of students that would get served in an overarching Ptac program. You're going to engage in some months of expansion. So again, this is a little bit loosely interpreted. Again, if you're planning already, you're going to plan to launch your Ptac in 22-23. So you have a little bit more of a finite timeline. But for those that are already established Ptacs within this time period, you want to make sure to collaborate with your partners. Like I mentioned, MOUs are already set for 21-22, and I'm sure that districts and partners are already having conversations with how to modify the 22-23. So make sure that with this expansion, where do you need to make exceptions for expanded support that you're providing to the students as soon as you get your NOGA. And that you have a plan, particularly for work-based learning. This might be easier for some districts that are incorporating a CTE program of study that's already matured into their Ptac program. But for anybody that doesn't currently have some of these student services, making sure that they have a plan on how they're going to expand and that you're serving Ptac students. So make sure that you're thinking through, how soon are we going to start incorporating the students? Are we going to do it in 21-22? How soon do we need to make sure that they have their PEMS indicator, which would be by the October fall snapshot? So all of these little components, making sure that they're all adding up, or are you going to give yourself enough time, like a year, to start incorporating some of these pieces? Excuse me. So for Ptac success key assurances, part of the eligibility and the assurance was that you were already a designated Ptac campus as either planning or provisional in the 21-22 school year. So we did look at our school year list to make sure that the eligibility was there, as well as the key assurances. So everybody who received the award, we already cleared them on that assurance. Continue to work with your technical assistance provider, which would be Educate Texas. Maintain and establish the partnerships that you have currently with your IHE in a written agreement So we know that that's always a flux if you have multiple IHE partners, but just make sure that you're established and you're maintaining at least one of those partnerships through your written agreement. And again, maintaining that partnership with the employer, because we know that some of you will be expanding that program of study. We know that will take time to establish that MOU if you're adding on more CTE type career clustering. Applying through the Texas CCRSM designation.org. For anybody who's already been in the network for a minute, you'll know that every year we have an annual designation process. So we just ask that you make sure to apply every year that the grant runs through. So that's 22-23 for next year and 23-24 for the following to cover the life of the grant. Continue to adhere to the legislative language. The language has not changed since inception. And we've used that language to infuse it into the blueprint. So that assurance is kind of checkmarked on its own. And at the FEAN, making sure that you're implementing the design elements that meet the outcomes-based measures. So I know that for some of you that are already in the network that are receiving their OBMs, just please continue to make sure to work at those and look at them every year as we send them out, work with your leadership team and your coaches on that. So some timeline pieces, we are currently in that first Ptac success year, academic year 22. We are hoping to launch that Ptac designation application. It might actually be a little bit closer to the October date for that Ptac designation, but that deadline will persist to be like the last days of January. So we are continuing that tradition of giving you about 2 or 3 months to complete that application to just stay compliant with the grant. That's really the big highlight of it. You will continue to receive technical assistance throughout your academic years, like we mentioned with Educate Texas. So this is a great snapshot of the timeline for some next steps, short-term and long-term. So again, some next steps. We do want to emphasize that we understand that with COVID impacts to the learning acceleration of some of your students, that taking on an additional grant can be very strenuous with the amount of assurances and requirements with any of our TCLAS initiatives. I have a lot of confidence with our Ptac success recipients because we've had you all in the network for such a long time. We've worked with you, but we do understand if after today's webinar, you go back and have a conversation with your district that you're not necessarily sure if you can commit to all the requirements and assurances on this particular decision point or any other decision point you might have received from TCLAS. Our TCLAS leadership wants to make sure that you know that if there's any issues with the TCLAS requirements and assurances that you need to have a conversation about, that you can absolutely reach out to TCLAS at tea.texas.gov. And also, you know, if you're more comfortable reaching out to me or a different contact that you have at the division level, please let us know. We understand it is very difficult. It is also the beginning of fall, which we don't, you know, we usually launch over the summer or over the spring. So it is a time where not a lot of grants are executed very quickly. So we understand if more support is needed or you need to have a conversation about it. But I'm very confident that we're giving as best support as we can to Ptac success. I'm very excited to be able to give funding to districts that are doing amazing work in Ptac already. So we've completed some of the webinar highlights and assurances. I just want to emphasize that homework piece from the PDF attachment from the confirmation survey. If you're not as clear on that, it may have just been sent to your superintendent and or the TCLAS representative. So if you're not too sure about that, you might want to reach out to that Ptac, TCLAS representative to make sure. And be on the lookout for that eGrants application. I believe it should be a pretty standard information to make sure that you get your NOGA on time. So please also take advantage of those webinars. I am going to leave this slide up in particular. I can go to any other slide if the question requires it. If you have TCLAS related questions or eGrant questions, please make sure to send it to tclass@tea.texas.gov for those eGrant TCLAS questions or TCLAS in general. Award questions should be sent to tclass@tea.texas.gov. If you have any specific questions about Ptac itself, please send them to ptac@tea.texas.gov. It's the same mailbox as the CCRSM. But please don't hesitate to reach out. I am going to head over to the Q&A and try to answer them as best I can. I did leave quite a bit of time, so hopefully we can get to some of these questions. So one of the questions is, we received the $200,000 award funded by general revenue. What does this exactly mean, and where does the funding originate? So if you're overseeing many TCLAS decision point awards, you'll hear the words general revenue versus ESSER funding. The ESSER funding is federal-based funding for specifically for COVID learning acceleration. So that is different. That actually applies to quite a bit of other TCLAS awards. For Ptac, that money is coming out of state funds. So for anybody on the call that's had to deal with half funding for federal, half state, different NOGAs, I know a lot of people on the call might have received a former Ptac grant before. This is purely state funds. So I know we have a really great slide about allowable versus unallowable in some of our other slides. I'll try to get that into this one particularly, but make sure to look at some of the budgeting and guidance document on the TEA website. My general rule of thumb for thinking about general revenue state, it's a little bit more flexible than federal. And it's likely that if it's for Ptac specific purposes for your campus, it's more than likely an allowable expense. But please don't hesitate to reach out to ptac@ta.texas.gov for clarification on funding. But the funding is state funds. There was a question, and I know multiple people, we did have that maximum of 5 campuses per district. A district did submit more than the campuses that were approved, about 4. Does the district choose which campuses, and can we spread the funds across the 4 campuses? So at this time, we are only awarding one, like by campus. You can't spread it out by the 4 campuses that you applied for. I know that would be ideal, but we are intentionally just targeting for 1 campus per award. Sorry. When will the TCLAS eGrant application be posted? On our slides, it does say mid-September, so we're getting really close. Make sure to come to the webinar tomorrow if you can. If you can't, make sure to go to the open office hours next week. I imagine by next week they must be posted, because how can you have office hours without it, right? So if it's not posted by tomorrow for the eGrant application, make sure to send that question in their Q&A. I'll make sure to follow up as well, but from what I understand, it's mid-September still. I don't have an exact date, but they are working really quickly to get that up. So definitely be on the lookout. I don't believe it's posted today. So I did have a question regarding that 5th or 6th year for students. Currently, we've had a handful of campuses retain their students for a 6th year, for a 5th and 6th year. That's been going really great for their district model. They can support that. How we've had the conversation with accountability is we will continue to use that 4-year graduation standard for all of our campuses in CCRSM, so that there's less of a feeling of a penalty for a 5th or 6th year. That's a super advanced question, and I know that some of you are already operating Ptacs. So if you'd like a one-on-one conversation about Ptac, the 5th and or 6th year, and accountability, please let us know, so we can be aware that your district is thinking about that, because we have had conversations specifically with those districts so that they can understand like the pros and cons, because we'd hate for people to have to say we're doing a 5th or 6th year and then maybe it's not for them and the students have an expectation. So I appreciate that question. I never want it to feel like a penalty. So please let us know if you have questions about a 5th or 6th year. So one of the questions about tuition came up for Ptac. The best way I can think about it is talk with your higher ed partner about what their dual credit tuition model is, how are they going to adjust it for Ptac, and you know, there's some higher ed partners that waive CTE dual credit. There are some that have a reduced amount per early college or TSTEM or Ptac student per student. And there's some that charge more based off of the availability of their faculty. So it's more of a question of what the cost share agreement is between you and your partner, to make sure that that's on board for how to handle those tuition pieces. So one of the questions was, can students who join Ptac after the fall, so after fall snapshot maybe, of their 9th grade year be coded as such in PEMS? So for reporting purposes, if they're after the fall snapshot, that's okay. They won't automatically appear in the next cycle of OBM reporting because fall snapshot is our cutoff, but you still, if they're a Ptac student, you still want to make sure that they're marked as a Ptac student so that that indicator can stay with them and they can be considered a Ptac student as long as they're still in the program. So, you know, we know that sometimes recruitment goes a little bit long or you need to fill seats. Fall snapshot, it's pretty deep into the semester, at least halfway point. So make sure that those students are being marked, but whether you hit the snapshot date or not, just please make sure that those students are checked off. One of the questions was, will each decision in TCLAS have a separate e-grant submission? Again, I don't have all the answers to the e-grants questions. Admittedly, I am a little bit newer to the e-grants process. I believe they've tried to simplify it as much as they can for the e-grants in TCLAS, for TCLAS specifically. So I'm not too sure how that's going to look on the decision side, if you'll have different, if they'll be considered different e-grants. My understanding is that they'll be the same, but I encourage you, even if you can just hop into that webinar and quickly send them your question and answer, so that they're aware that you have that, and or please send that to the tclass@tea.texas.gov so they have that listed, that you would very much like to know how they're going to set up the e-grants, especially if you have multiple decision points. So there was a question about the months of expansion Do they begin for everyone now or later? So it's really up to your district. Like I mentioned, if you're in a situation where you're folding in a CTE program of study that's a little bit more mature, that can happen for you right now, especially if they already have a dual credit MOU and you're just folding those students into your Ptac program. If you are expanding or adding on another program of study that is not necessarily already based in a dual credit MOU, or you're building it out from scratch, I definitely encourage your district to treat this as a little bit more of an accelerated planning year, and to take maybe a year to start planning and then implementing with new students. So it really is going to depend based on where you're at with your campuses. If it's an expansion of students, like that question asked about adding on more ninth graders, you can absolutely add on more ninth graders. Excuse me. So that can happen as soon as now if you already have the students in there and it's before fall snapshot. So it really just depends on what your district's comfort level is with starting to give opportunities to students. So another great question, does the expansion allow us to expand the number of students past the 125? Yeah, so I think in a lot of different iterations of the blueprints, 125 was like the sweet spot number for school within a school. You can absolutely go past that 125 if you need to, and if you have that many programs of study that are going to support it, or if you have a program of study that already does support that, like a business or computer information technology. Expansion can mean a new program of study or expanding the number of students. So this is a comment for anybody who might be the TCLAS person in charge of their district. For 9B, they didn't see any additional onboarding requirements. For 9B, they did look in their letter and they didn't see anything else. So for Ptac success, there's not a lot of next steps that are required outside of identifying which campus will be receiving the Ptac Success Award if you applied with multiple campuses. That's truly it. We're going to be working with Educate Texas to identify how we can support you a little bit more, if it's with more checkpoints between us and you all and grants in addition. But for 9B specifically, there are not a lot of next steps. For other ones, there might be for other decision points, but for 9B specifically, there aren't that many outside of making sure you know which campus is going to be supported. Excuse me. One of the questions is about the funding allocation for Ptac Success and how it can be used. What can we use to purchase it for specialty equipment for Ptac, student recruitment? So I'm guessing they want a little bit more context for how that can be used with the Ptac Success. So if you've noticed with TCLAS, many of the other initiatives don't allow for things like capital outlay or more specialty equipment. For Ptac, we're a little bit different because we know that there's some Ptacs out there that do manufacturing, or you need to buy a fleet of laptops, or you need to buy certain materials that will remain at your particular campus for a long extended period of time. So if you work closely with your CTE representative or with that campus leader that you're already supporting, make sure to follow up and see what equipment might need to be replaced if you already have equipment. Machines break down all the time, and we understand that, you know, specialty equipment needs to be purchased. If you're a health science, what are some of the consumables that need to be turned over periodically? Those are some of the examples. Computers and mobile devices for the specific purposes of the Ptac Academy are absolutely allowed with the funding that we're giving out. And in terms of payroll, because there was a question around more administrative spending, for payroll, that's a common expense that I see a lot of our Ptac grantees use the money for, because sometimes you have to supplement the administrator or the counselor or the work-based learning coordinator if you need one, a lot of it for extra duty pay and components like that. So there is room for you to spend on that, and that's quite frequently what I see being spent for former Ptac grants. So we have a very new person to our Ptac network, and I want to welcome them. They've never worked with Ptac before, and they're inheriting the program. You're amongst friends. That is a very common occurrence. The homework piece from the last slide, they're not sure who might have received it. So definitely, I'm not sure what size of district. I can't see what districts you all are from. Send an email to the tclass@tea.texas.gov email, and they might be able to help you out with figuring out who your TCLAS representative is that might have received the PDF. If it wasn't you and or one of your colleagues that might have suggested this PDF, reach out to them as well. But I don't think they'll have a problem with trying to help you out to get to the person that has that PDF document. If it's not you, I think, and you're the new Ptac person, you might just need to worry about making sure what campus you all are going to move forward to. A lot of questions about the homework and the award notification email. Please make sure to email tclass@tea.texas.gov about the homework PDF slide. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of questions on that it might not be attached. So please make sure to reach out if you're having any confusion on that. Those emails were sent from TCLAS leadership and not from the decision points. So I want to make sure that you all get a response from the TCLAS email about that. Definitely going to clarify again for this, because we definitely want that money used for equipment if it's necessary. You can absolutely purchase new equipment for the expansion of this. I know I talk a lot about the equipment maintenance part of it, but I know that sometimes you don't need to buy a new equipment piece, but if you have to, that's an allowable expense for the Ptac Success Grant. So one of the questions was specific to Ptac ninth graders and how they impact funding as 10th through 12th graders. So the $50 per Ptac student follows that student for as long as the HB3 funding is supporting the Ptac. It's still going strong currently. So as a ninth grader, 10th grader, up until that money is supporting that $50 per student, that student will receive $50 per year. And they're also wondering how ninth graders impact the OBMs. So the outcomes-based measures for ninth grade students, we're really mostly looking at the demographics of your Ptac. So we're looking more at how you recruited your students through, did you recruit at risk as it compares to your district, comparatively to economic disadvantage as it compares to your district, which is why I mentioned a lot the recruitment piece and how it can mirror what your representation is within your campus and your district. So that's how ninth graders really come into play for the OBMs. as you begin serving students in 10 through 12 and start doing a lot more dual credit, that's where the other OBMs come into play. Things like IBC completion, certificates, dual credit components, things like that. You will be able to get a copy of the PowerPoint. They are, the TCLAS team is working to get the recordings of these sessions as well as the PowerPoints up on the website via PDF. Yeah, I have a great tip from someone in the Q&A. Make sure that you're able to sustain that payroll once TCLAS finishes in 23-24. After that, that's a very good tip. And why we kind of always emphasize supplementing versus supplanting some of these responsibilities to make sure that it keeps going. How do students who enroll as 10th graders or 11th graders into a Ptac impact funding and OBMs? So I don't think there's any negative impacts to the funding with 10th or 11th graders. I will emphasize it is a lot easier to get the students in as 9th graders. We encourage it. It's not a rule, but it's definitely encouraged. You can work with them consistently and they can receive the supports. But a student who enrolls in 10th or 11th grade, if they're being Ptac supported, they are Ptac students. So they qualify for that Ptac PEMS indicator. For OBMs, you know, if you're a 10th grader and we're tracking persistence, I can see where that would definitely come into play. That would actually increase your numbers a little bit, which could be good. Excuse me. But you know, if they're starting late as 10th or 11th graders and they haven't necessarily hit the outcomes that you want, that's one way that a Ptac could be impacted with their OBMs if they have 10th or 11th graders enrolling at a later time. And then there was a question about who do people contact if there's an error in the Excel document for the budget planning document formulas. That would be a tclass@tea.texas.gov email. So make sure that, again, emphasizing if it's a Ptac programming question, y'all had really great questions and comments about Ptac specific things. Those go to the Ptac mailbox. If you have questions more specifically to the budget planning, Excel documents, or anything that TCLAS has put out, like the guidance, the recordings, the webinars, the e-grant processes, please make sure to send those to the TCLAS email so that they can keep track of what it is that needs to be corrected for. I'm going to do a quick scan of the chat in case someone put a question in there. Yeah, so an administrative position is allowable to support the Ptac. That is correct. I want to give a shout out to Stephen Henn for helping us out with those spending rules. Thank you very much. Definitely appreciate that. Definitely need it. For that additional questionnaire component and for e-grants, please make sure to contact TCLAS. The PowerPoint will be available online. Some more really great slides for some funding pieces. I believe we, just one last question coming in, and then I'll definitely let you all go. You can use the Ptac Success Grant to purchase equipment. So there's a question of TCLAS money. Can that be used to purchase equipment? So Ptac, because it's supported through general revenue with state funding, we are allowing you to buy equipment if you need to. If you're hearing something else from anywhere, please let me know. But we as a Ptac Success program, we did indicate that equipment purchasing for the purposes of your Ptac expansion is an allowable expense. Yes. And then I had one last request about the homework. I will leave this up for you all in case anybody needs to take a screenshot to email over to anybody. I want to thank y'all again for continuing to do the Ptac work throughout learning curveballs throughout these past years with COVID. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We're very excited for the funding opportunities for Ptac. That's been our webinar. Thank you very much. Our 9C webinar will be later today. And please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you.